Hey everyone, Internet PCS book reader here. Today I want to talk about Regenesis by George Monbiot. First of all, before we start, this is a great book, but at least half of the book discusses one of the hardest and maybe more depressing issue that humanity has ever faced, climate change. If you want to know more, I will try to explain a bit of what the book gave and hopefully it can give you an incentive to get the book if you're interested. But if you've been having a rough day and just want to skip the topic, hey, I get it man, no sweat. Take care of you first and maybe watch this on another day. There's a reason why there's a lot of doomers came out of this topic. The book will detail all of that doom and gloom, but it won't stop there. We are still looking and finding more and more solutions, and I want to talk more about it. The book opens up by telling us about the history of apple. Yes, the fruit apple, which is subtle nod to the Genesis part of the title and its role in the Bible. Apple's tree Latin name is apparently Malus domestica, which roughly translates to tame evil. It is named such possibly because of a dialect problem, which should have been melon or fruit, but someone misheard it as malum, thus it is forever known as that evil fruit. But that's not important. The most important thing about this opening is the nature of an orchard. How to make an apple grows from pruning the trees systematically, making them into compost, cutting grass, and most importantly, the soil and the ecosystem beneath us, as the book says. Like many people, I like to imagine that I find my own path. But we are influenced to a greater extent than we are usually prepared to admit by social consensus. We think along the lines laid down by others, follow paths already trodden. We see what others see and ignore what they ignore. We might argue passionately about the small number of issues on which the spotlight falls, but implicitly and unconsciously, we agree to overlook other topics, often of greater importance. Few are either as important or as dear to us as soil. It then told a story about spider, ants, the creepy crawlies of the land, worms, centipedes, and even creatures that have more specific names like symbiote, creatures that live off the land and in return give life back to it. Possibly one of the oldest symbiotic relationships that helps each other thrive and form other lives. And all of this to paint a picture on how in order to support all of these lives, these are how soil got their nutrients and immune system. An attempt to make changes to the soil often led to make them more unhealthy, both the soil and its inhabitants. This unraveling of ecosystem is called dysbiosis. While the topic of the book is definitely not going to be interesting to most people, but the writing is spectacular. Everything is told like the author is telling a story, an experience that he witnessed firsthand. He somehow makes seeing bugs and counting their legs into a compelling story. It's somehow a book that is more engaging than the celebrity mental health book that I just reviewed. And by breaking it into these details, we can also see how much we actually know about our own soil. We often see on the internet about why we are researching space when we didn't know enough about what's underwater, not knowing that there is also so much research and funding to what's underwater, and that we have seen the plastic bag in the deepest part of the ocean. Meanwhile, in our usual fashion of not paying attention to what's close to us, what we lack research and funding is dirt, the soil beneath us. We only know less than half of the nutrients that make up a healthy soil for a healthy ecosystem. But unfortunately, dirt is not like space that are deep and scary and mysterious. And it's not like underwater that are deep and scary and mysterious. So there's less interest on finding the funds in researching it. The book is an attempt at figuring out how our ecosystem works in a world that changes so fast and its effect on all of us and our foods. As usual with these things, farmers is the first one who start feeling these changes. Because only certain crops makes money, farmers grow identical plants with identical techniques. At least with closing the gap yield where they use fertilizer etc. that the soil grow more and more resistant to. They need to keep upping the nutrients. But it is a cycle that has a cap in it until eventually the investment they need to improve their yield outweigh any gains they make. It's not a sustainable way of living both for the land and for the farmers. The only people who gains are a few corporates. They held the patent for the seed, fertilizer, processing, packing, distribution, retail, machinery, and etc. Then you add this with how much plant is needed to produce meat and how much are wasted on biofuel compared to how the amount of plants we need. Then we add another problem with how unstable our system are with its export and import. It's a recipe for disaster, not just because of the rising price of everything, but also because of the increase in heat and humidity. This is how the book explains it. As our normal body temperature is 36.8 Celsius, when the air rises about 35, The temperature gradient is too shallow to draw heat away from our bodies through radiation. At this point, we can lose heat only through evaporation, in other words, sweating. But because evaporation also requires a gradient, in this case a moisture gradient, sweating no longer cools us when humidity reaches 100%. The measurement of heat at 100% relative humidity is called the wet bulb temperature. Human being dies of heat stress beyond a wet bulb temperature of roughly 35 degrees Celsius. In reality, most of us will die before that point. A 35 degrees Celsius wet bulb temperature can kill a fit and healthy person lying perfectly still. Yes, this is the temperature increase in climate change we often hear about. If the temperature rises to 2 to 3 degrees Celsius, it will be considered life-changing dangerous. But what people often miss in the conversation is that it is the global average temperature rise. Some countries might only rise around 1.5 degree, but some will rise and have risen to 7.5 degree. And even if some or most people can survive that, the corpse from the farmer might not. And then, because of the increase in temperature and humidity and everything, there will be more extreme weather. In the US alone in 2021, the loss of crop yield are at least double due to extreme weather. Even the Suez Canal seed that are mean because it's stuck because of a massive sandstorm that blew the seed sideways. All the problems that have already compounded so much is then added with our water usage. Not the daily one we use, but from everything we've talked about and more. Crops need water, a lot of it, whether to feed us, for livestock, or biofuel, or to make cotton for clothing, etc. Meanwhile, as a result of global heating, crucial water sources are disappearing. Around 1 month each year, about 4 billion, half the population of the world, suffer from water scarcity. There are countries that have exported their water, and because wet place will get wetter and dry place will get drier, this will become more and more of a problem. Meanwhile, our government attempt at solving it, like biogas digester, is making it worse instead of fixing it. Chicken and cow farm cause algae to bloom because their excrement was disposed haphazardly, ruining rivers and the fish that lives in them. While pig manure is poisoning the land with arsenic, mercury, chromium, copper, and manganese that make the crops grown in them unsafe. So they use antibiotic on the soil, but as the book has explained at the start, soil nutrients are a complex system we have lack of understanding. The antibiotics grew into the food we eat and cause us to build resistance to antibiotics. And this is all while microplastic got inside all of us from the foods we eat. And again, farmers are the ones who had it the worst. Because of all the chemicals they need to use to produce better yield, their blood have 20 times the average concentration of these cancer-causing chemicals. All of this, and we barely got into the third chapter and a quarter of the book. And it's already quite a depressing batch of information, to be honest. Meanwhile, the solution we've got that has gone viral did not work when tested. Organic food leaks so much nitrogen that instead of benefiting the environment, it did the opposite. And that's without talking about how small the percentage of organics are actually organics. Then the holistic management ranch popularized by Alan Savory that even got a Netflix movie narrated by Woody Harrelson was not supported by studies. In fact, it was debunked by the studies. Even a study from Alan Savory organization itself, the Savory Institute, told us that it can even endanger the soil even more. And a solution to this is highly important, because a third of the world carbon emission was by the food system, with roughly 70% from farming and the rest from processing, transport, selling, and cooking. The transport itself is small, so even buying food from local sources is almost insignificant. But as I mentioned at the start, not everything is doom and gloom. In the next chapter, the author went around finding people who did all the research and tested them to see how far they have worked, and a lot of good work is being done all over the world. Ian Tolhurst has built farms that use no pesticide, herbicide, mineral treatment, animal manure, or other kind of fertilizer. But he can grow fruit and vegetables where the productivity is rising, but the soil nutrients and fertility also climb steadily. Because his farm is not using pesticide, he needs to learn how to deal with every pest. And every pest is like a puzzle on their own that is beneficial to the farm when they are solved. He also did not force his land to produce only certain crops, but also produce local crops, and predators and pests are more drawn to those native plants compared to the non-native plants. It's this ecosystem that supported the soil and the farm. It's a little bit more complex than what I just described, but it's one of the few solutions we have now that did not immediately crumble under scrutiny. And Tolly is not the only one trying to change farming, if what Tolly did is for fruits and vegetables. Tim Aston did for greens in different but similar way with rotating corpse method that is used as a plot point in Mauyusa. More research needs to be done on this technique, but unfortunately there's barely any funding on this kind of farms. All the funding goes to the top agriculture corporates that have failed or planned. For example, rotating crops mean that they need to keep changing what is planted each harvest. But the corporate put target only on certain crops, so selling them are much harder, and often cause monetary loss for the farmers because of corporate pressure. These are before mentioning the monopoly of farming machinery, which is why Tim also chose to reduce the use of machine in his yield, so he's not bleeding money from buying repairs and maintenance that only the company can provide. We also have Ian Wilkinson that is coming from the market side of things to try to change to support farmers like Tolly and Tim. And then we have companies like Solar Food made by Pasivaninka that made a new plant-based protein that is superior to meat. If it is not clear enough, this is a book that educates a lot on the benefit of plant-based food both for the environment and the world we live in, and for us and our health. But this book is not a cry to turn every single human into vegetarian. The book is also very clear that there is a pipe dream that did not care about the humans that will be affected by this change. Too often it seems to me, food writers and campaigners take the missionary position, seeking to convert people to their own diets without apparent recognition that this might be impossible to universalize. I would love to imagine that everyone might subsist on leafy greens, wild herbs, fruits, nuts, pulses, and raw cereals, which they could either grow or gather themselves or buy from local suppliers and cook at home. But I recognize that for many, this proposal fell somewhere in the spectrum between impossible dream and atavistic nightmare. Apart from anything else, the great majority of world's people simply cannot afford to eat like this. Remember that a healthy diet currently costs 5 times as much as one that is very adequate in terms of calories. If food writers who promote their own diets also call for a radical distribution of wealth from the rich to the poor, I might support their prescription, but to propose this menu without an economic transformation is to tantalize and mock. I am always open that I am a fan of Kyrgyzstan channel, but it is a channel run in big part with a lot of false positivity. Some of their videos like the climate change one and the most recent one on Korea's population are some of their worst videos because there's a lot of important information that are not even briefly mentioned in the video. That's maybe too depressing. It's a very Disney-fied version of topic where everything is nice and family friendly. But if you look in depth into the problem like this book, there's so much and then and meanwhile because everything compound and stack to make problem worse and worse. Just like the song goes, can it get worse? Yes, it can. While it proposes a few solutions, it is also very clear how difficult it is to achieve them. So I can see how the issue described in the book add a lot of the doomers mentality. They look at history and see that there's a lot of shit we've done that is fucked up beyond all reason, and we see all the fucked up things that we still got into. And then of this, it's a lot of pressure. But what they often forget is that we have gone through all of that and more, and still is, and yet we survive. Because if anything, we've proven that we are survivors. And just because something is difficult, that doesn't mean it is impossible. One of the ways to help is to support farmers and these techniques that we have found effective to produce more yield with less environmental harm. So when the world started changing to the damage we've done to it, we all can still recover and maybe even thrive from it. This is honestly the best written non-fiction I read this year. What I've mentioned barely covered everything in the book. That's how dense it is with useful information. But not only that, the writing is so good and the flow of the story never feel like there's too much information. Every word just counts, which is very rare in a non-fiction like this. Gaia Finch from Observer said in the front cover, "If a book can change hearts and mind, this is it." And I have to agree with her. This book is awesome. I give this a 5. What do you think? Are you gonna read it? Did I miss anything? Leave your thoughts in the comment below and subscribe to the channel. That's about it.